Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Eye for Pharma webinar, Align Your Culture with the Patient in Mind. We're just at the top of the hour, that hour varying depending on where you're calling in from. And we will start in about 1 minute. I see some people are just coming into the room, so we'll get started very soon. Okay, my name is Jill Donahue. I've been asked to facilitate as well as be a panelist on this webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome you to an hour of conversation. Looking forward to chatting with the fellow panelists here and with you. I want to congratulate you for being here. I think it really says a lot about you that you chose to take an hour out of your day to learn and see how you can grow. And I believe these are the people I love hanging out with the most, because I think high performers are the ones that are always eager to understand how they can improve their own performance. So good for you for being here, first of all. And I assume you're here because you are committed to patient centricity. You know it's the right way to go, yet you find it challenging to turn this into action across your organization, perhaps. So if that's the case, then this webinar is definitely for you. We are discussing ways to create a patient-focused culture. So glad you're here. Now, who are we? There are 5 of us online here to have this conversation with you. And maybe I'll just start by passing it over to Jack. Jack, can you start by telling us who you are and why you're here?
That sounds good. I want to offer a very warm welcome to a good cross-section of attendees from life sciences, and we've stacked the meeting with a fair number of patient advocates today as well. So when I was first diagnosed with this rare incurable cancer, a lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma, back in April 2008 or 7, the word incurable really scared me. It's like being asked to play a game that you can't win. So I wanted to learn as much as possible about treatment options, the biology of cancer, and so forth. So I joined a number of professional advocacy organizations like AACR and ASCO and LLS and others. And as I learned more about life sciences conferences, I'd always stayed for the 3 days, and I became this, sort of e-patient, this engaged, electronically connected type thing. And so I started doing some events, speaking at some of these conferences to help share the story. So basically, I participated in 7 clinical trials for this rare blood cancer because there was no standard of care. We were essentially borrowing other chemotherapies from other blood cancers, sort of a whack-a-mole game, really an empirical approach where you would try drug A, and if it failed, you'd move on to drug B and so forth. So there was some molecular level testing behind all of this as the promise of the Human Genome Project started to come together, and we started to get into more precision or personalized medicine. And this concept of patient centricity really aligns beautifully with that. So I began a series of treatments that included targeted therapies, and there's some emerging immunotherapies that I've not yet participated in. So I was very active in monitoring my own blood biomarkers, providing real-world evidence back to the physicians, letting them know whether I was relapsing, or I was responding or refractory to the drug. So there's sort of like cheating in the clinical trial space, which is really patient centricity. It's a two-way street. And in my case, I feel that we failed in spite of all the work of tracking this. I did develop very recently a very advanced stage metastatic prostate cancer, also with that word incurable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences, but I'm really more interested in how this applies to the topic at hand, which is patient centricity. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And just the knowing what you're going through right now and your commitment to this is just leaves a really huge impression on how important this topic is. So thank you so much for being here and bringing that that depth to the conversation. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
And we'll move on to Kaylon. Kaylon
Hi.
Taylor-Clark.
Yes, this is Kaylon Taylor-Clark, and I am the head of public affairs and advocacy in the cardiovascular unit at Sanofi. But I was actually hired to this company as the global head of patient engagement strategy in a new office of a center of excellence with a chief patient officer. A lot of the companies and industries, as you all know, have become more what we would call consumer-centric. And I think part of that is that the idea is that they want the quote-unquote end user in mind. But when it comes to a pharmaceutical company or when it comes to a biopharma company, I was always kind of skeptical of that. I'll be honest with you. I was a professor before this. I worked in think tanks, and I had never actually worked in the pharmaceutical industry at all. So when first I got the call and then I was recruited to that position, I thought, what an interesting idea that they want someone with my background that could really think through how to bring patients in every aspect of what we do. So a lot of times, the way we think about pharmaceutical companies engaging with patients, it's always sort of in a post-market space. We've developed a drug for you now how do we sell it to you? And what our company is trying to do is step back and say, what if we actually brought patients in at the very beginning, before we even buy an asset or a molecule, all the way through the development process. And so I've been really excited to be part of this patient-centricity movement, particularly in this space, because I think it's so incredibly important that we have patient voices, not just in the marketing of things, but really thinking through how do we bring patients as part and parcel of what we're creating, because at the end of the day, you cannot just create it for people, you have to create it with people. And that's why I'm here.
That's awesome, Kaylin. Thank you so much. And Michelle, you're going to be joining our conversation as well. Can we learn a little bit about you?
Yes, hi. Hello, everyone. And again, thanks for participating and joining. A bit about my background and my role. So I serve as the Vice President for Patient Advocacy at a company called Aviona Therapeutics, which is a clinical stage company that's developing gene therapy and plasma-based therapies for severe and life-threatening rare genetic diseases. And I came on board with this organization just over a year ago. I was specifically brought in to serve as a resource for families, a point of contact for any who are interested in not only the potential therapies that we're working on, but also just the pure aspect of providing education and information about gene therapy. Sometimes people are curious about the drug development process. It's very, from a layperson's perspective, can be very overwhelming and wrought with terms that are very hard to understand and piece together. And so that's my role here with the organization, is to provide a very, at the level of the individual or groups that I'm speaking to, way of explaining and sharing about those topics. And certainly I've had a number of years of experience within gene therapy, about 17 years in total, as well as molecular diagnostics and genetic immunization. And so I'm very, very thankful to be participating so closely with the families. And I say families because the particular potential therapies that we're focused on happen to be those that impact children. And so it's many, I do get to meet and of course interact with the kids as well, but it's the parents, the grandparents that have the questions, and so many questions, and so I'm very thankful to be able to be the one for this organization that gets to share about those things.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great, Michelle. Can't wait to hear your ideas. Thanks for being here. And I'm next on the list there. That's me. I'm Jill Donahue. My story is why I'm here. I started in pharma many years ago, carrying the bag, and I'm a bit of an academic geek, so I was really fascinated with when physicians wouldn't change behavior for better patient outcomes, so I started studying it and researching it, and I won some awards for those publications and thought, well, I might as well do my master's in adult ed, so I focused on influencing healthcare behavior change with that. And then when I was 35, my dad died as a result of a prescribing error. And being in pharma, I pictured that closed door between pharma professionals and healthcare professionals, and I realized how dangerous that can be and how things could have been different if the pharma professional had been able to better engage the healthcare professional. So I realized that I wanted to research this full time. So about 10 years ago, I left pharma to research and teach what I was learning. And I wrote a couple of books in my attempt to help pharma build back our trust and our ability to engage healthcare professionals. And obviously, being patient-focused is absolutely key to this. So recently, I co-founded with Paul Sims, who's the chair of eyeforpharma, a nonprofit group that we've called the Aurora Project. And this is, we're trying to bring together global leaders, thought leaders, a global group of pharma people, basically, trying to illuminate the path to patient centricity. So we'll talk a little bit more about this project later, and if anyone's interested in that, please drop me a line. Now, I work on that as well, you know, as an author and researcher and speaker. I pursue this mission I have to help pharma make their patient-focused growth efforts work and build purpose-driven, influential pharma people. So I'm having a lot of fun right now helping people learn how to make patient-centricity work for them, and using this Power of Purpose program that we run with people is really rewarding for me. So that's a little bit about me. And then Rosa, last but not least, can you say hello and why you're here?
Thanks, Jill. Morning, folks. My name's Rosa Ellswood. I'm a Global Project Director at eyeforpharma. One of my key projects right now is heading up Patient Summit USA, which is happening in Philadelphia on the 10th and the 11th of October. I've also been producing, as part of that agenda, I've been producing this webinar and organizing the logistics behind it. So I'll be sending the recordings of this webinar to everyone soon after. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. And over to you, Jill. Thanks.
Thanks, Rosa. And speaking of questions, you'll see that you have a question box under your GoToWebinar control panel. Don't hesitate to reach out. In fact, I'm going to guide you there as we go through here so we can make this interactive and get your input and ideas as well, and of course your questions. So in summary, our goal, the five of us are here with the hopes that you'll leave energized with some new ideas to enhance your culture of patient centricity within your team. Now, when we talk about you are quite a diverse group. And if you could just put up the panel, Rosa, or the poll, Rosa, so we can try to get an idea. I know this is a very limited choice of in which department you have responsibilities, but if you could just go ahead, you see the blue quick poll that just came up, just go ahead and select one of those that closely resembles who you are, and if there's nothing there that closely resembles it, just type it in the question box, what department in what department you have responsibilities. So go ahead and type that in the question box, or click over here if there's something here that fits. I'm just going to count down from 5. So please quickly click on 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now, through the magic of technology, Rosa, you'll be able to put up who is online, and are there people putting in the question box other departments? We have a large group from commercial, from patient advocacy, clinical, and also some trainers, some educators, and some regulatory. Is there anything else missing, Rosa, that people are putting in the question box?
Let's have a look. We've got market access and one person there. But no, it seems like the majority are from patient advocacy or commercial backgrounds.
Awesome. Great. Nice mix. So we'll try to have a little bit for all those groups. Keep in mind that there's a wide variety here, so hopefully we'll find something that fits for everyone here. Our agenda, basically, we've done our introduction. I'll do a little brief thing about where we are now regarding creating patient-focused cultures, and then we have a few questions that we're going to ask of you guys out there as well as the panelists. So you guys will be sharing through the question box, and our panelists will be sharing verbally, and hopefully we can get some interaction going on before we take a moment to reflect and talk about where to from here. So, patient centricity, where are we now? Last year, after the eyeforpharma Barcelona conference, Paul Sims and I were chatting, and we were saying, you know, you really can't manage something that you can't measure. So where are we now regarding patient centricity? And we created this idea that what if we could do a survey? So we did a global survey. Many people online may have been involved in this or completed the survey, because we had quite a few people complete the survey. In fact, there were 70 advisors, maybe some of you are online, who helped us with the design, and over 800 people have volunteered to interpret and disseminate the results. There's huge interest in the survey. There were over 2,300 people who participated, from patient groups, from pharma, bio, med device, and also solution providers were participants in it from 84 countries. So we got a really good look at where are we now regarding patient centricity. What do we believe? What are we doing? What are the outcomes? All that sort of stuff. We completed the data collection in March, and in fact, you can have a summary of this survey if this is of interest to you. There's a link there, but even easier, Rosa has put over, if you look back over to your control panel under handouts, you can click on that and download the summary of the survey right there. And Rosa can also send you, following this, other information. There's a white paper that's been written. There's more coming about it. So as I said, there's been incredible interest. People are, we're also inviting people to join the Aurora group. So if you are one of these people who would like to raise your hand, please do. That's how this is growing. To give you a very brief sneak peek into the top 2 insights that we found from this survey, this was insight number 1. Patient centricity is entering pharma's DNA, while confidence on the how lags. When we were doing our practice webinar, Kaylon had a great quote that I just put on here. She said, you know, while we say it's in our DNA, we haven't quite mapped the genome. I thought that was a great way of expressing it. So we all have in our vision and missions. Well, I'll ask you, what percent of people do you think rank the importance of delivering on patient centricity as greater than 8 out of 10? Do you think it's high? I was pretty pleased to see that it was. 86% ranked the importance. So this is important to us, figuring out how to be patient-centric, how to make that work in our organizations. It's important to us. But then when we asked people what percent rank their confidence in their company delivering on patient centricity as 8 out of 10 or more, that wasn't so high. What do you think that was? That was down at 21%. So obviously we have a gap here, a learning gap, and so that's our next step, and why we're doing webinars like this and conferences like the Patient Summit that Rosa was talking about in October in Philadelphia. That's what we're trying to do, is increase our confidence, and that's our challenge. How do we increase our confidence? We know it's important to do it, so how do we do it? And that leads to the second insight from the survey. We started to identify key success criteria for effective patient centricity in pharma. And the number one thing was to create the right internal culture, internal communication around patient centricity. So that's what the topic of this webinar today is. Engaging with patients also came up. Focusing for the long term instead of the short term. I suspect there's heads nodding out there about that one. Deploying appropriate budget and training. 65% are trying to learn how. Only 39% agree appropriate training is given. Measuring. How to improve patient-centric efforts is to learn how to measure them. So these all came up as key success criteria right now. So back to that number 1 thing, the creating culture, I heard this expression, and I quite like it. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it doesn't matter what strategy we talk to about, if we don't have the right culture, it's not going to work. And so that's what the theme of this webinar is how to create that culture. So I'd just like to ask you guys out there, how true is the following statement for you? Our culture, or the mindset of everyone in our company, is focused on the patient. So if, Rosa, you can put that up, your responses there are, that's not at all like us, or maybe that's a little like us, that's like us, that's a lot like us, or totally like us. Click which one fits for your company. And I'll give you a countdown from 5, so please click quickly. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Rosa, through the magic of technology, let's see. Okay, interesting bell curve. I'm glad to see not many people said not at all like us. Panelists, are you guys surprised by this? A little like us, like us. It seems to win out there. Jack,
I was just going to say, it's about what I would have expected, that there, again, just where industry is moving and trying to figure out how to incorporate and interact with the patient community. As you said early on, it's the confidence that's lacking. So seeing more two is probably where I was anticipating.
It's certainly consistent with the survey, isn't it? So good to see. So that leads us to then, let's talk about it. What are your greatest barriers to creating a patient-focused culture? And as we're talking, audience, you can type in the question box what you think your greatest barriers are right now to creating a patient-focused culture. And from the panelist side, maybe I'll just ask Jack to kick it off. You had put together some slides on some of the barriers from your perspective. So, Jack, do you want to start us off?
Sure, will. I like this question. There's a real struggle in the industry today to define, what is patient centricity? And for me, it's really like trying to define compassion. We know what compassion is, and it's really hard to put it into words. It's a behavior. It's a style, it's a way of engaging with patients and providers and healthcare providers. So I think we will struggle with this, but I like to think about starting with the word compassion, which brings us back to the patient. Biotech and pharmaceutical firms really want to become patient-centric. Many are developing a practical guide or a commitment statement that said, we will be a patient-centric company. And the industry really wants to earn this sort of like good housekeeping seal of approval that says, hey, we are patient-centric. So I'd like to give you my thoughts on this. The first thing is, let's start with patient data. If we're really designed to be patient-centric, let's start focusing on patient data. And we're not doing a very good job measuring patient data. We spend more time measuring processes rather than measuring patients. And for the best engagement, what patients want to know is, how am I doing? And if we as an industry can't answer those questions, especially during a clinical trial or during treatment, we're falling short. So I always say, give me my data, and more specifically, give me my biomarkers. And these biomarkers, there's a full range of very simple biomarkers like, your blood pressure and pulse rate, but there are more detailed molecular level biomarkers that are coming into play. Predictive and prognostic biomarkers that all patients should be asking their physicians about. Now this data engages all. It includes patients, physicians, researchers, payers, policymakers. It actually gets us all on the same page, because if we're measuring the effectiveness and safety of these drugs based on patient data, we're heading in the right direction. We really want to anticipate the outcome. And as I said earlier, to determine if you're responding to a therapeutic, if you're relapsing, if you're refractory or there's no response, or if there's an adverse effect, or more important, a serious adverse effect. Next slide.
Okay. Yeah.
So the research business is really, it's about research centricity. On one side of the scale, researchers in the lab are keenly interested in research. On the other side, patients are interested in treatment. Back over onto the research side, they're interested in what's happening in the lab, and then on the patient side, we want to know what's happening in the clinic. And finally, as we move up on this clinical trial process, there are these rigidly defined protocols that say how we will conduct this research. And again, from the patient's perspective and the clinical perspective, it's more about the patient. So the clinical trial process that we use today is broken. We use very out-of-date biometry, and we've not kept up with the new assumptions about new targeted therapies. We're just not moving fast enough. So what this slide illustrates is the need to fully disclose data, use current information technology. We've really fallen behind in this industry. So if we can have a more balanced approach, balancing the needs of research along with treatment, balancing the needs of what's happening in the lab with what is going on in the clinic, and similarly balancing the needs of the protocol and the patient. So we need to fully disclose data, and we need to use current information technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. So just to summarize some of the things that I think are very important, design the protocols for the benefit of patients, not just for research. There are incredible new information technology tools that allow us to do a much better job data collecting and reporting, mobile devices, iPhones, iPads, Androids, and so forth. We need to urgently get out of batch mode. And what I mean by this, view old, data processing text or EDP text, we used to process all data in batch mode. And now, of course, most of the stuff we do is done in interactive. But if you look in the clinical trial space, we still key punch up data in spreadsheets and we mail them off someplace into the cloud. What we need to do, as soon as that data is available, there are these electronic patient-reported outcome tools that are coming online that allow us to grab the data and get it back to the researchers right away. These new targeted therapies have many new assumptions. For example, when I get a chemotherapy, I'm in treatment now, I sit in the chair and the first thing they do is to perform a blood test. And the blood test is designed to test, am I ready for the chemotherapy I just received, rather than what was the response to the last chemotherapy. We're not measuring that. And sometimes many of these targeted therapies and immunotherapies bring on a response within hours or days, but yet we're not reporting that data. And even worse, the data that is collected at the healthcare facility does not go back to the biotech or pharmaceutical firm for months. So we have to get away from these old tried and true templates that have served us well in the past that enabled an FDA approval. And these business processes are sort of stuck throughout our industry. We need to go away. We talk about go paperless for data mining. We're still doing so much stuff with paper. In fact, we're still using fax machines as an example in this industry. Next slide. Wow. So life sciences, I think this is really important. We need to do a better job engaging your patients. I see three very key obstacles. The distribution channel does not facilitate communications. And the distribution channel are biotech and pharmaceutical firms don't get to talk directly with patients. They have to go through an intermediate as a healthcare provider or a clinic of some kind. The regulatory environment really prevents open communications. We are discouraged from talking to patients. We're not allowed to sell or promote, or more importantly, listen to or be influenced by patients. These are serious cultural issues that pervade this industry. People in biotech and pharma said, please do not talk to patients. And again, this is something that comes from the compliance and legal department. But if we go back to the patient data and close the loop, if we start with these biomarkers to answer the basic question that all patients want to know, how am I doing? Again, report this data using these electronic patient-reported outcome tools. Report all results, good and bad. In the United States, we do not have to report any results of phase 1 clinical trials. That is atrocious. If we have a failure in a clinical trial, this stuff needs to be reported. And this is really what patient-centricity is about, getting the data out there and making it free-flowing and available. We need to track and anticipate the outcomes, and as I said, report when there's people not responding or refractoring to the drugs. We have to look at the therapeutic effect. What is the drug safety profile and toxicity? We need to fess up more prudently about possible adverse effects. We have these little white sheets of paper that go along with the drugs. We need to be more clear about these potential adverse effects. This will help us get better adherence and compliance and better reported outcomes from the patient, from the clinic, and from observer-reported outcomes. Next slide. So I often caution this too, is don't listen to everything we patients say. Patients are nothing more than the man on the street except for our experiences. So life sciences right now is listening, I believe, much too carefully, much too hard to a group of patients. We have to be careful. you really want to remember that what we offer is our experience. Don't be so risk averse. Be bold. We have the best science on our side right now. We need to educate regulators rather than fearing them. There's a whole range of new technology coming on board, and we need to help bring educators up to speed with issues concerning immunotherapy and targeted therapy, all the new technology coming on board. And finally, I say don't be a chicken. And if you get that chicken working, we're doing good here with the chicken. But again, be very bold. Science is on your side. Next slide. So this is perhaps one of the most important messages, if I can get a message to life science today. We are patients and we are people. If you could promise yourself no longer to use the word subject or participants in anything you write or say, stick with the word patients or people. We have patients in this study. You know, don't describe us as a member of a cohort or a member of an arm or a control group or an accrual number. These are all of the things that we use that kind of dehumanize who we are. So if you can leave today and say, make this promise to yourself, I am now going to use the word patients in everything that I described, boy, that will be a really positive step in the move toward patient centricity. Thanks very much.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you. And I'm so glad that we have people out there hearing your voice. And I have to, again, say how much I admire and what a great impression it is on me that you have taken the time in the middle of your treatment and all the challenges you're facing with your health to share things that can help so many other people. So thank you for sharing that.
Part of my medicine. Thank you.
That's great. Are there questions that have come up on the question panel from people about what Jack has said? A lot of great stuff there for the clinical folks listening, as well as some great words of wisdom for the marketing commercial folks too. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Kaylon Taylor-Clark. And I had wanted to, I'd hoped to respond to a couple of things that Jack said because I think it's really important, and I really did appreciate also, Jack, your contribution here. The way we're thinking about this, and I know that there are commercial folks on the phone here as well as the R&D folks, but one of the things that I'm really interested in doing is making sure that we're not just making something for patients, that we're doing it with patients. And what I mean by that is, as an example, we had, for our clinical trial development, we actually had something called the PAIRS program at Sanofi. I'm giving you some initiatives and tactics just to think about as exemplars. But this was the Patient Advocates and Research at Sanofi. And what we actually did was brought a patient in with the condition that we were looking at, and they became part of the trial design team. So it wasn't that, we were getting informed by patients from a survey or something and then adding it in. We were actually being informed daily on how to develop the protocol, on what we needed to do with the informed consent, etc. And in fact, initially the trial design team was really skeptical of bringing a patient in this capacity without the quote-unquote expertise. But at the end of the day, my view is that the patient is actually the absolute expert. And if we can actually design something with them that's for them, I think it actually goes a long way. I will tell you that our trial design team actually found that the length of time for the trial was shortened, that the recidivism for the trial was reduced, and attenuation was reduced in that trial. And they were actually astounded at the contributions that this one patient could make sitting in the room with them, helping to make decisions around the design. So that's one example. But the other thing that Jack mentioned that I think is also very important isn't just about the biomarkers and the clinical research piece, and I think the commercial folks that are on the line here might appreciate this. One of the things that we don't very well do is take our real-world evidence, particularly our patient-reported outcomes, from the research that we do in the post-market space, and really use that evidence and use that information, not just to think differently about how we're marketing, but also to feed it back into the life cycle management process. We don't have a protocol for that. We don't have a system or a structure for that. And that's something that is a lost opportunity, because at the end of the day, we are collecting actually a lot of information, both from the sort of clinical collection of data, but then also from surveys and patient-reported outcomes. And we're really not using those in an effective way to then think about how we could develop patient support programs, how we could develop other aspects of the sort of treatment design. And I think that's something that we want to be thinking about all the time. And I know not just for my company space, but across the pharmaceutical industry and even some of these, particularly the patient groups that are really trying to deal with this, that's an important point. And the last point I wanted to make is we don't have a patient voice in the value of treatment. And I think that's something that keeps coming up in terms of really getting an understanding of how patients are their perspective of the value of a treatment or a therapy as part of the value frameworks that are kind of being developed, and not in getting into the pricing and all of that, but I'm really thinking about how do we use patient data and how do we use patient voices and bring patient voices into those areas in the life cycle management process that would actually be able to give us better decision making and better outputs at the end of the day. So I do think that we want to use patient data in a number of different ways, not just with biomarkers, but again, across the board. And we have a lot of really innovative activities that are happening. I said not just in our company, but I've seen it across many different companies. I'm very encouraged.
That's awesome. Kaylin, thank you so
good.
much.
Yeah.
That's great testimonial of success, too. I hope people were listening to that. Wonderful. Rosa, is there anything coming in from the question box from the audience out there before, and Michelle, you may want to say something about barriers as well. But first, is there anything from the audience people?
Yeah, so there's one question I think is particularly interesting from Michelle Gilson. She's saying, I think the biggest barrier is getting support from the top down. It really needs to start at the top. So it'd be interesting to hear panelists' comments in response to that question.
Yeah. Michelle, do you want to comment on that one?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I'm probably in a bit more of a, I guess what I would consider a unique situation, again, with our organization focusing on rare diseases. It's a bit different than something that affects a larger population of individuals. And so with that, I'll just use our organization as an example. We really were forged by and standing right next to about a dozen foundations that were around the world focused on bringing about a potential therapy for Sanfilippo syndrome, which is, again, a rare disease, a lysosomal storage disease that impacts children, and it's a quite terrible one at that. And so with these dozen or so organizations, their input was given early on, very early on, in fact, as well as infusion of financial support to lift this therapy off the ground, so to speak. And so where this comes with my role in particular is that because we were forged with the families, with the patients, supporters, right with us as the organization, as our company grew, it was very apparent that a specific individual needs to be put in place to really be that point of contact, to be that person that serves as the resource, as the place of education for these groups. And so that's something that I think, to tie back to what is a barrier, just going beyond saying you're patient-centric on a website, how do you truly incorporate that? Well, I think one of the first steps is, ensure that you have someone who is in that role and is empowered to be that place of education, that role of support for the families, for the foundations, and for the patients. And so to gain that support for having that particular role, I think you have got to tie that back to how there is a return on investment for that, why it is good for the company, good for the organization. And I think that's going to be very dependent upon, if you're in the early research stages, if you've gone into clinical trial and they're making your way through, or have an approved product on the market, because it's certainly different for all aspects of those stages. But tying it back to why there is a benefit for the organization is always going to be helpful in gaining that support from above.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'd add too that leadership of patient centricity is incredibly important, the voice from above. And on top of that, I'm also trying to empower people to say it starts with you, and it's the mindset of each individual person. So we asked on the survey, for example, which department should be responsible for patient centricity? And I was pleased to see that the majority, not a really strong majority, but the majority said every department should be. So this should be in the mindset, the attitude, and the language of every department, from the receptionist at the front all the way up to the CEO. And in the work groups that I've worked with, I've seen it go both ways, top down and bottom up, trickling both ways. So for example, when a team does really, really well because they're implementing new patient-centric selling approaches, head office hears about it, and then that goes up the ladder that way. Or the other way, where from above down it's influenced. So, but I will agree, and I will agree that when we have strong leadership saying this is the way we have to go, that is really a huge driver, or a barrier in the converse example. So shall we move on to question number 3 on a positive note? What are some of the things you've seen people doing right? What are the greatest aids to inspire or create a culture of patient centricity? And we have this as a poll question. Thanks, Rosa. So again, very small, limited choices here, but if you can choose one of those choices, and if there isn't one there for you to choose, write it in the question box. One of the greatest aids to inspire or create a culture of patient centricity. Write it in the question box, and I'm going to count down from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what do we have? Very popular, engaging with, listening to, including patients, and that's the example that we had earlier from Kaylon. Changing their language to be more patient-focused. I think we have a lot of work to do there. Training, in our survey, we found that a lot of people don't know what to train on is one of the problems. Measuring, we certainly have a long way to go. And long-term focus, yeah, that's a frustration for a lot of people. We're so focused on quarterly goals here. Can we ask, was there anything in the question box, Rosa, that came in with people of other ideas of things they've seen people doing that is helping to create a culture of patient centricity?
Yeah, there's one interesting comment here from Nisif Kumar, who said cultural change will take a top-down and bottom-up approach, but it also takes time, years, to implement. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that just reinforces what we were just talking about, doesn't it? The top-down and bottom-up, and the long-term focus. Team on the line, panelists, who would like to start with some of the things you've seen that are greatest aids to creating a culture of patient centricity?
This is Jack. I'll quickly say a couple of things. Yeah. I think it really does start at the top. Years ago in quality circles, we had this Six Sigma program. The whole manufacturing industry started to realize the benefit of embracing quality and do it right the first time. There were many of these great initiatives that really did improve the manufacturing quality of high-tech products and that. And one of the reasons it was successful is that the CEOs of the companies saw the real value of doing this. And I think we're pretty much in the same stage with life sciences companies, with biotech, pharmaceutical, CROs. If the CEO sees the real value of patient centricity, and it makes a big difference. And we're already seeing moves. There are certain companies, I'm not going to mention names here, but some companies the CEO is very patient-centric, and it's pervading all department areas of the company. It's I think the idea of participating in getting patients to be involved in the development of clinical trials, I'm seeing more and more of that. It's a fabulous idea, and there are very compelling savings when you do that. So I think starting at the top is really a very smart move.
Cool. Michelle, Kaylon, any other ideas of things you've seen to create a culture of patient centricity?
So Jill, this is Michelle speaking. So I think when you're looking at all the different participants in an organization, be it small or large, you have your regulatory group, you have your clinical operations, marketing, et cetera. And I think that that can quickly get very overwhelming on how to create that culture. But I would offer this, that if you start small and simply and speak to those the priorities or what is held to be important by those individual groups, I think that's a great place to start, because certainly they're not going to receive a message in the same manner because their focus is different. So I can share an example of something that I had done prior, well prior to initiation of our clinical trial. Was I worked with our clinical operations group to engage two sets of caregivers or parents to better understand really what are their concerns, what are their challenges with regard to travel associated with clinical trial or accommodations. What should we be considering for these children in the stage of progression and where they're at and their specific needs. And it was a great way, and I saw, was able to see firsthand and just how that really shifted or adjusted the mindset of the clinical operations group, in that to hear that firsthand was really helpful and gave a much better designed travel program, as well as the accommodations that resulted. And certainly we went into assumptions, but hearing directly from the families, we walked away with some really just great information, and I feel very good about what we've put together for this trial.
That's awesome. That's great. Kaylon, do you have any other ideas of ways to create patient-centric culture?
I think this might be a little too philosophical, but I think, the bottom line answer for me is to remember that, or is to not necessarily believe that we're already there, right? That we can do more. And one of the ways, for example, that I'm doing it with my team is I actually put performance measures around, for my team, around whether we've engaged patients, whether we've used patient data or survey data or whatever to inform any of our work. But I actually make that a KPI for my colleagues and employees to be thinking through. And so that's what I would say. I think it's, and I liked what Jack said also, it has to come from leadership, but it also has to come from the folks that are on the ground doing work. And I also think that that's important, and they have to feel inspired to want to be able to embrace this concept and this idea and the notion. So that's what I would say.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, the creating the patient-focused culture, I've been having a lot of fun with this, with, like you said, empowering the people, helping people connect with why they got in pharma. So we were doing some of these workshops we've done at eyeforpharma, where we work with people to help them dig deep to why did you get in pharma, and help them reconnect with their power of impacting people's lives. And so we're capturing this on video, as you'll see here. We have some clips. We're hoping to start a hashtag #WhyPharma, where people will put a video together of why they got into pharma, and or maybe why they stay in pharma, right? Because they have gotten in touch with the impact they can have on people's lives. And once we do this, we help them get back in touch with the impact they can have and their purpose. Then we ask them for ways, how can we keep this alive in your organization? They come up with things like, one company had, now hopefully your companies have pictures in the hallways of patients and their stories. A lobby that had an example of a patient's living room and how she was dealing with the illness, just to remind you as soon as you walked in the building. Things like changing your hiring practices, putting together a video of people on your team and their purpose, and then showing that at hiring practice, at hiring time, changing your goals. All of these ideas came about, changing our language. So instead of talking about our market share and our sales growth, we talk about the number of patients. The language piece is a big part. Talking to customer-facing associates about the language they use within their teams. Adding to evaluation forms, would a patient be proud if they were sitting in on this meeting? of ours. Things like that all help. What are the reminders, the reinforcements that you see every day to help create that mindset? So I'm really loving working with people on their mindsets. And what I find is at the end, they stand taller, they feel more proud, they're more excited about their job, and they're more engaging with internal and external people. And they say things like, sales increased by 30% after doing this. Like, that's awesome. That this isn't just morally imperative, but it contributes to our growth as well. So changing the mindset, there's so many things we can do, and I'm curious if there are people in the question box, Rosa, that are adding ideas of things they've done to change the culture or the mindset, be more patient-centric. Do you have any ideas coming in, Rosa? Rosa, are you there? We've lost Rosa. Rosa, you're muted. If you think we can hear you, we can't hear you.
I think she had an 11 o'clock tea time.
Well, while we're waiting for Rosa, yeah, she's having tea time over in England there. That's right. So while we're waiting for Rosa to come back, hopefully we haven't lost all the participants. But we have a final question here, and it has to do with, now that we've got everybody wanting to do patient-centric initiatives and ideas, any ideas, panelists, on how to get internal buy-in for your rewritten, ROI-driven, patient-centric initiatives? Panelists, ideas on getting buy-in?
Well, again, I think it depends on, excuse me, what you are seeking to accomplish, but tailoring that to the specific group or the specific department, and really serving up what the benefit would be, what the outcome could be, and tying it to, again, that return on investment is going to be very, very important in getting that support. But yeah, I can't stress enough that this is it's something that you really have to lay out from I guess what I would consider a strategic place, how you would incorporate information or participation from patients or their caregivers, and then what would that specific benefit be and how to realize that.
Right.
I think if you demonstrate that you've laid that out, that's going to be more successful.
For that example, showing the ROI is really the holy grail on this, isn't it? And that's one of the things I'm trying to do, is show the evidence in the literature that shows when we're purpose-driven, we are more profitable, and bringing it back to this is what will create our sustainable cycle, right? Oh, I think we have Rosa back. Rosa, we can hear you now. I think you're typing there.
Yes, apologies. I'm back in the game.
You're back. Good. Okay. Any other ideas? And Rosa, if you have anything in the question box of people who wanted to share their ideas for creating patient-centered culture, please share them. Go ahead if you have any. Rosa?
Yeah, sure. So Alan Thomas is commenting, yes, talk with the patient as opposed to talk to them. There's a slight difference. Right.
Yes.
Can the panelists talk about, what is the difference between talking with or talking to a patient?
Who would like to take that one? Jack, perhaps? Talking with versus talking to?
Yeah, it is so important. It is really is a two-way street. And I always do caution the industry that remember who you're talking to. I mean, there really is this struggle, and it's almost laughable. You say, well, I get 5 patients in the room. We have to listen to what these 5 patients say. So, I always, say embrace science and what has served us well in, vetting good research information. It's important to listen to patients, but again, be very careful. The question on ROI-driven patient-centric initiatives is very important. I think we're being much too simplistic in measuring ROI. For example, there was a major debate between administering pill form chemotherapy and infusion therapy. If a patient receives infusion therapy, it's covered 100% in medical coverage here in the United States. But if a patient receives pill form, that's considered pharmacy, unlike our friends in Europe that get pharmacy coverage or medical coverage at 100%. We don't do that. We don't provide that coverage. So in trying to justify pill form versus infusion, virtually none of the biotech or pharmaceutical firms calculated the total cost of administering the drug. So in looking at the ROI, we were not doing a good job at the overall cost of the initiative. So I think that we need to start thinking differently, especially when there are these new assumptions coming along with modern medicines, the response times and the effectiveness and the safety profiles. They're much better defined, much more easier to see, but the calculation of ROI, I think, is more complicated than ever.
It's a holy grail, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. As we are approaching the top of the hour, I would love to hear reflections from the audience as well from the panelists on this conversation. Is there anything that it made you realize or reminded you of, or you were surprised to learn, or you plan to do? If you could just type, finish one of those sentences in the question box, please, and then Rosa, if you can read them off as they come in. But please just give us your thoughts.
So here's an interesting comment from Carolyn White. She's saying, bring in patients and families for quarterly business unit meetings. Not only talk at meetings, but also tour research and development. That's an interesting reflection there. Gurmit Sandhu has said, I plan to research more on short term. That's an interesting one there. David Ehlers is saying ROI should include psychosocial metrics as well.
Yep, definitely.
Great.
Maria Corrales has said, I plan to make an effort to change the language I use when interacting with colleagues. I personally think that's really important. Language really demonstrates our true intent, doesn't
Exactly.
it? So I think it's important to highlight the influence that language has.
Absolutely.
And we've got Jim Byron saying, and this is relevant to Jack's reflection of his clinical trials. Jim Byron has said, ensure that our clinical teams take the time for real dialogue with trials process. So Jack, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's important. You know, some companies are particularly concerned about speaking with patients during a clinical trial. You know, they're concerned about bias, they're concerned about exchanging information that perhaps shouldn't be exchanged, especially from a legal or compliance standpoint. But one thing that we can do is rely on the data safety monitoring boards. These are independent groups within companies. They're like the IRB internally of a company. And we can get this data to these data safety monitoring boards. And they're in a position where they can be independent and objective, and I think we should start embracing them. Let them be one of the communications mediums directly to patients.
Awesome. Well, with just 2 minutes remaining here, I want to thank Rosa for pulling us all together and creating this opportunity to share ideas. Obviously, we could all talk for hours about our ideas, about our belief that when we all focus on our purpose, patients, growth follows for everyone. Better outcomes for everyone ensues, and that's without a doubt true. So thank you to all the panelists. To keep the conversation going, we're all going to be at the Patient Summit. Can't wait, actually, October 10th and 11th. And it's this type of conversation that happens there. I always feel completely invigorated and energized by sharing ideas with people there. So I hope that, I know I'll see the panelists there, and some of the attendees would love to chat with you and share ideas with you live at that conference. Anything that you want from anything that we talked about today, you can reach out to Rosa and she can send you. You can download again on your handout section there the summary of the global survey that we did on patient centricity. Have I missed anything, Rosa? Any final comments from Rosa or anyone else?
I think we've covered everything. Thank you so much for, I just want to say on behalf of eyeforpharma, thank you so much to Jack, Michelle, Kaylin, and Jill as well for participating in this. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll be sending you the recordings in the next few days. That just in response to the people who've typed questions asking if they'll get recordings and the slides, yep, you certainly will.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. Lovely to chat with you. Have a great day to all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Signing off.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.